One, and we're going. Once again, welcome to Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan and my wife, Tracy.
Hi, everyone.
You know, our procedure before we get started is always pretty much the same. Run. Is the lighting ready? Is the microphone ready? Is everything set?
And then just
jump right in.
Yeah.
So
here we are.
It's a good thing, like, we started when we do, because if you were to watch that, it would be like the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
Like one of those old Laurel and Hardy movies, which I love and you're not too big a fan of, but
No.
I like that old comedy.
I can have an appreciation for, but
it's really my thing. And don't get us started on the Three Stooges.
Oh no. It's like kombucha.
So we're here to talk about something that I have always felt, the 1975, it's almost like an invasion of UFOs over American and Canadian bases that had nuclear weapons. And it's an amazing thing because in this day and age where we hear everyone talking about UAP now, it's like UFOs going away and they're essentially defanging UFOs. Rebranding is definitely underway as far as I can see. So into UAP where, well, we don't know what these things are. Well, the hell you don't know what they are. You absolutely know what they are because they have been causing mayhem over military installations for generation after generation. And we're going to talk about some incredible encounters that happen now. It's going back more than 40 years, but they are still unexplained, not even remotely explainable in any conventional way.
And this particular series of events are super interesting that happened, you know, day after day after day.
Yes, absolutely. And at the time, I mean, no one had any idea what was happening. They were reported a little bit locally at the time. And then what's really interesting is they didn't get any national exposure until 2 years later by, drumroll please, the National Enquirer. And it's really worth asking. Maybe we'll get into this maybe at the end. I don't know. It's something that I've always considered very interesting indeed. Like, why the National Enquirer?
Oh, I love thinking about that.
Right. And the kicker is that the Enquirer's coverage, basically by journalist Bob Pratt, was legit. They did, that was a true breaking story done in the, most goofy tabloid in the United States, the National Enquirer, but they actually, in that case, in 1977, Pratt did it. And so it's worth asking why. Now, I don't want to get too much ahead of us, but that newspaper, of course, was run by a man named Generoso Pope, or Gene Pope, who how many people would have thought that the head of the Enquirer would be buddies with Richard Nixon? Well, Gene Pope was, or buddies with Nixon's Secretary of Defense, Melvin Laird. How does that happen?
Kind of interesting.
That's right. Well, Pope was running an operation that was certainly started with CIA money. There's been a lot of work into investigating the origins of the Enquirer. But personally, I think that they covered that when they did because local coverage was out there. There were rumors already afoot, and the Enquirer basically put that information out there to quash it so the professors wouldn't look at it, the media wouldn't look at it, and so on.
I find it particularly interesting that they had a budget to do these proper investigations.
Yeah, that's right. UFO investigators back in, I don't want to get too far off here, but it's worth knowing, like when Travis Walton in 1975, the year we're talking about, when he had his abduction experience, the local UFO groups like APRO, for example, were astonished. They're like, how does the Enquirer get all this money to fly Bob Pratt out here and to do all of this investigation? They couldn't rub two nickels together, these UFO groups, but the Enquirer did have money. So it's very interesting indeed. But that's maybe we'll get into that another time, but I just think people should know.
It's a great part of the story.
Absolutely
maybe at the
is.
end.
Yeah. And in preparation for this, we stumbled on a YouTube video that neither of us knew about. And I think we'll talk about that. That has to do with Loring Air Force Base, one of the main Air Force bases dealing with UFOs in October, fall of 1975. Turns out Loring's had a lot of incursions, not just at that time, but before and after.
A lot of incursions, and also a lot of different people in different roles at these Air Force bases reporting this
as witnesses,
as
right?
witnesses.
So from guys on the flight line to air traffic, to tower controllers, to pilots and mechanics of all sort, were all reporting these
This was a
things
case on
every
a
morning.
lot of these bases at this time, it
Yes.
turns out. So yeah,
Totally, absolutely.
that is fascinating. And I don't think a lot of people know about it because,
No.
I mean, you know, you get this sort of peppering of sightings. I think people who aren't really into this, you know, they hear peppering of sightings, they hear maybe a little bit of MUFON, but
Right.
if they heard this stuff, you know,
Well,
it would be hard to imagine how they wouldn't take it more seriously.
no,
you
if you
know?
try to do a search on the 1975 UFO incursions, try to do it on YouTube. Good luck. You'll get nowhere.
Yeah, that was fascinating that there wasn't a lot there.
No, there's not. And YouTube, of course, is has developed a totally dishonest search algorithm. Like nothing that they do is honest, controlled by Google. So when you do a YouTube search on these things, you get CNN, Fox, MSNBC, BBC. It's like, what? They never stop. So they load the dice, and you will never get what you're looking for. But aside from that, the 1975 stuff that very few people have really talked about. It's really an amazing thing.
Yeah, I would say for those of us, I know I've talked about this before, but have people in our lives who absolutely think this is garbage. Start here. Start here. These are amazing stories.
Right. You didn't have a lot of knowledge of this before we started, but I have to say you got up to speed really quickly on a lot of this. So that's good for you. And
I'm lucky. I know you all think that. It's true.
So the other thing I just want to say before we jump into the cases is that 1975 is a year. It is a forgotten year with UFOs. Like everyone thinks of 1947. A lot of people will think of 1952 when UFOs are seen over the Capitol, and other big years as well in the 1960s. But people generally do not think much about this year, 1975. And in my own opinion, it's always been my feeling that this was a seminal year in the history of the UFO, and particularly in relation to military encounters. This is very, very big things going on there, which incidentally didn't stop. They kept going into 1976, and maybe we'll get into those someday. But the 1975 was massive, and not just for the intrusions, but for several major abductions. We mentioned Travis Walton, but there were actually several others that were quite high profile at the time. We'll get into those maybe when we come back to the 1970s encounter cases.
And what about cattle mutilations? Wasn't that sort of the beginning of a lot of the reporting on this?
Yes, absolutely. That's when they really took off. There were cattle mutilation reports prior to that, even going back into the 60s, but it was in end of 74, early 75 when they just explode. And many of them, by the way, or at least a number of them, took place very close to the Air Force's NORAD installation at Cheyenne Mountain. We'll have to talk about that sometime. And then the other thing that happened in 1975, for the first time people started noticing, were these unmarked black helicopters. And it's not clear to me that they were in large numbers prior to that. But they were being seen significantly starting in that year. And a lot of it was in America's West. So out Midwest to the western part of the U.S., I really think something important was going on. And
that's
we haven't
really
put it together.
That's really important too. When, I think after we jump into this, to come back to the helicopters, because it seems to me that was a convenient thing that they could say at the bases. That it was some helicopter.
And indeed they did.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was that was in fact the dominant explanation for these cases we're about to discuss. Except no one, and this really has to be emphasized, in any of the cases we're about to get into here, there was not one single positive ID of a helicopter in any of them. Not one. So you get possible helicopter, probable helicopter, all of this stuff. But with the cases of these truly perplexing cases, none of the witnesses were able to say, "Oh yeah, definitely a helicopter." They were generally silent or nearly silent. They had maneuverability capabilities that were
unconventional,
including acceleration and all of the other
vertical
things.
acceleration, rapid. Yeah,
that's right. That you get right with UFOs and only with UFOs. So the other interesting thing about these 1975 cases is that nearly all of them have very, very good government documentation that we can rely on. So, it's always important when you talk about UFO cases to be able to have evidence that someone, any reasonably skeptical person is going to want to see what's your evidence. And so these cases have genuinely authentic U.S. Defense Department documentation proving that something was going on. Now, not all of them do. There are a couple of these cases that do not have official Freedom of Information Act documentation, but they're definitely strong cases. I'm going to talk in a little bit. I'll mention the research of Robert Hastings, who wrote the very excellent book UFOs and Nukes. Hastings, really more than anyone, has delved into this particular matter of UFOs and nuclear weapons, and has interviewed a large number of witnesses who have corroborated and confirmed the accounts of a lot of things that we're going to talk about here. But it also has to be said, Hastings is one of many, many researchers who have looked into this. I've had a fascination with this issue since I've started with UFOs, and a lot of other researchers have been diving into it and have discussed this with many witnesses. And one I'm going to mention here was a researcher named Francis Ridge, very active with MUFON for many years. And this is a very interesting case. I'm going to talk about. I mentioned Cheyenne Mountain just a moment ago, and this concerns Cheyenne Mountain. I want to share my screen with you. And here's just a map so you can see right there in Colorado. And this is what the exterior of the base looks like. When you see in all the movies, the base inside the mountain, it's Cheyenne Mountain. So what appears to have happened is that at the very end of October 1975, and we do not have a date here, all right, NORAD appears to have gone on a top alert status at that time. Some years later, Francis Ridge came into contact with a witness of a very, very strange event that took place at NORAD's headquarters right here at Cheyenne Mountain. This is just outside Colorado Springs, which is U.S. Air Force Academy and very major military presence here. So according to what Ridge learned, this was called a full-scale security option 5 alert. That's very, very high level alert, and UFOs and investigators from what were called, at least by one of the witnesses, the Air Force UFO Division were part of the picture, but we don't have an exact date. So according to Ridge's witness, all of these witnesses were men employed at NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain installation. They were on leave, and all day long they were out together. They had been hunting. So then now it's nighttime. It's getting close to midnight. They have a late night fire going, and they're getting ready to go to sleep. And one of the men thought he saw a shooting star. 15 minutes later, someone else said, well, there's 2 of them. So there's something going on there. And then a moment later, they see a 3rd object. So the lights are moving independently to different parts of the sky, but then they line up. And they all, according to the witnesses, move directly toward Cheyenne Mountain. Then, within a few minutes, they are hearing the buzzers from the base indicating an alert status. They may have been on leave, but it didn't matter. They were also on call. So they pack their gear, they get back to the base. They're still wearing their hunting gear. They drive back to the mountain at top speed. They get there at 10 minutes after 2 in the morning. And they get their weapons. They go to their security posts. The base stayed on high alert until 6 in the morning. So now Ridge's main witness had radar duty that night. And he said that they were able to track UFOs multiple for a good 20 minutes, he said. And then Also, the men learned that a significant, I don't know how many, but a significant number of jet interceptors had been scrambled. So here's an interesting follow-up to this, and this is totally typical of all of these military cases. A few days later, some of the guys, these witnesses, started checking into records, looking into the security alert. They just wanted to see, what can we learn anything? Well,
of course.
So they don't find anything, so that's surprising. Like, how could you not have something filed about this? Or they thought, well, maybe it had been filed and then pulled. That would seem more likely. But what happened is, once they started snooping around, Air Force investigators showed up, and Ridge's witness basically just called them the Air Force's UFO people. I don't know how he got this, got that phrase for them, but that's what he called them, the UFO people.
Okay.
So one by one, the UFO people interviewed these guys, and the first thing they told the radar operator, file a report with us right now. But then they tell everyone in the group that all you guys had seen were aircraft landing lights, no big deal. But even though that's all you saw, you have to ignore this incident and never mention it again. So that's right.
Right.
And it got even a little bit worse. They were, within 2 months of that, each man in that group had gotten a written reprimand for drinking on duty, which was untrue. And in fact, they hadn't even been on duty that night. Like, they were. So, but the whole point was really to
sort of a good cover story to discredit them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. So that was the NORAD Hyler, and we don't have a paper trail on that one, unfortunately, but Ridge was a very excellent, responsible investigator. He wrote a lot of articles for the MUFON Journal. He was very well known, and that was his witness. And I thought it would be a good start it off. And that preceded the events that we're now about to get into. So let me find the next screen share I want to show. And this is, now we're getting into Loring Air Force Base. And these took place 2 nights in a row. So the night of October 27th going into the 28th, and then the night of the 28th going into the 29th. And now this is, we have a paper trail here, and you can see where Loring is located. It's northern Maine. It is right at the border with Canada. Here's a more close-up. We're talking like 5 miles, I think, from the Canadian border, right by New Brunswick. You can see right there, all very close by. So these events here that I'm about to talk about did leave a paper trail, partial paper trail, at least a few years later. You can't make a reasonable argument to dispute the reality of that something happened. Now, and there's no explanation as to what these objects could have been. So let me just describe. The first case happened the night of October 27th. And you've got the base control tower tracking a low flying craft on radar. This object's approaching from the northeast, which is in Canada. You can see right here on the map coming in from that direction. So anytime base is going to get an object coming in on radar, they're going to try to make contact with it. And they attempted this, but they were not able to establish contact with this object. So at 7:45 in the evening, 7:45 p.m., a staff sergeant named Danny Lewis, he's on munitions security, sees something. He sees a low-flying craft moving along the northern perimeter of the base. This object then penetrated the perimeter at a very low altitude, about 300 feet above the base. Let me stop sharing the screen here for a second. So it comes over the base at just 300 feet above, and that's incredibly low. That's low enough that you could hear everything. Right. You could see it. You could hit it with a baseball. Yeah. If you've got a good arm.
Easily see it. Okay.
That's right. So the object was identified, had a white strobe light. It had what looked like a red navigation light on it. But the object's inside the base, and it starts to circle around. And at one point, it comes to within 300 yards of the nuclear weapons area, at which point it dropped down to only 150 feet. So just like
they
everyone
must have been freaking out. right?
They were indeed, in fact.
Keeping
So-
this all to themselves, but my God.
Well, you just have to, I would ask people to visualize this. There's not a lot of artwork done. There's no photographs of this, but visualize being at a base like Loring, which was a front line, like nuclear defense base. Like those guys at Loring recognize that if there was an event with the Soviet Union, with the Russians, that led to war, they were going to be a target. And
Right.
they themselves had nuclear weapons. So they were highly professional frontline types of defense guys here. And you've got an unknown object 150 feet over your nuclear weapons, just hanging out there. So this is very, very serious. The commander of the 42nd Bomb Wing, that was at Loring, his name was Colonel Richard Chapman, is notified of the situation, and he brings the base to major alert status. This object was deep inside the base for quite a while. At 8:45 p.m., it was seen by the Tower Patrol. You have other units of the 42nd Police. They get on the scene. There's a request by Colonel Chapman for fighter coverage over from Hancock Field, New York, as well as another NORAD region in Ontario Bay in Canada. So in other words, jet interceptors were being requested. And it's very odd is that both groups denied his request for jet interceptors. It's very interesting, and there may have been some kind of administrative glitch for this, but maybe there was some other reason for this. Maybe they didn't want to engage this object.
Maybe they were covering it up, but at what expense when we're talking about nuclear weapons?
So it's true, and he had no other options except call for the Maine State Police for help. I don't know what they could have done. They were in helicopters. So anyway, he's instructing the base security people to just try to identify this craft with what we've got, but no one was able to identify this thing. The craft had been in a circling pattern, then it starts moving back toward the northeast, and it eventually leaves the base perimeter, and they were able to keep it on radar contact until it is well into New Brunswick, that's in Canada, about 12 miles away.
12 miles away, so it's very close.
It's very, very close. So we don't have as much. The one that happened the next night, we actually have more information about, but this particular one was quite dramatic, as you can see. And Loring was very much in a high alert status throughout the whole night, and then well into the morning. Just 24 hours later, this whole scene repeated itself again. So at 7:45 p.m. on October 28th. Well, I've got a quote here. This is the quote for the night of the 28th. So let me just wait a bit, and I'm going to show people this. But you have 3 security people, again, at the munitions storage, the weapon storage area. They see an object approaching from the north. At a more of a normal altitude, about 3,000 feet. That's still kind of low, but not extremely low. For the next half hour, 35 minutes, this object was under constant observation, visual and radar. It had a flashing white light. It had a solid amber light. And it also seemed very stealthy because it disappeared from view visually and radar several times. Once again, commander of the base, Chapman, requests air support. And this time he got it. National Guard, helicopter, and crew come in. Loring itself did not have helicopters, as far as I've been able to understand, but they got a helicopter crew from National Guard. Permission not for apprehension, but only to identify and to track this thing. So kind of a limited authorization, but anyway. So they've got it under observation. The object keeps its distance. It's not inside the base yet. It's a couple of miles out. And then somehow, no one really figured out how it penetrated base security again. And once again, it's now over the runway, 150 feet above, once again. Now, the earliest good research on this was done by 2 UFO researchers, Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. In fact, they wrote a book called Clear Intent. That was the original title. That phrase was taken from the Loring intrusion, as a matter of fact. And Fawcett and Greenwood reported that there was a crew chief from of a B-52 bomber, and actually his name was Stephen Eichner. And they got a quote from him, and I'm going to share the screen, and just so you can read this along with me. So he says that he and other members of his crew watched the object when it was over the flight line. It looked red and orange. He said it looked kind of like a stretched out football. So I just want to point out that these people got a clear visual of this object, and it clearly was not a helicopter. And he said this object's hovering in midair, and everyone just stared at it. And then it turned off its lights and disappeared. By now it's nighttime. So you'd have to wonder how a normal object could just disappear simply by putting out its lights. I mean, you got a low-flying object, even without lights, should have been visible at night if the observer knew where to look, but they couldn't see it. Then the object reappears over the north end of the runway in a different position. It moved in these jerky motions, and then it just hovered. This is a restricted area, and no one was supposed to be there, but the crew drove there anyway. They weren't allowed to do it, but they did. They got to within 300 feet of this object. It was very, very close. They didn't report this particular sighting to the base because they were afraid of getting into trouble. They did tell Greenwood and Fawcett about it. But they said they saw this object very, very clearly, and it seemed as though it was practically on the ground, hovering, they said, without movement or noise, about 4 car lengths long, and described as like all the colors were blending together as if you were looking at a desert scene. You see waves of heat rising off the desert floor. The object was solid, and we could not hear any noise coming from it. So that was Stephen Eichner's statement to Greenwood and Fawcett. Quite fascinating. There was no noise. They couldn't see any doors, no windows, no propellers, engines, nothing like that. And the other thing to point out is that at this time, the base was on high alert. And we're talking sounds of sirens filling the air, police vehicles speeding around the base. Like, you could really make a very dramatic movie scene out of exactly what happened at Loring that night. And incidentally, the incident didn't end. So once again, the lights of the object went off. And when they came back on again, the object had moved even closer to the weapons storage area, maybe within a quarter of a mile, still 150 feet altitude. We have memos on this. The Department of Defense memos stated that that element of the event happened at 1 a.m. So that at that point would mean the encounter had been going on for more than 5 hours at that point. And this was about when the time that an Army National Guard helicopter was there and tried to contact and identify the intruder, but in the words of the report we have, was unsuccessful. We don't have a lot of detail in these defense memos, but we do learn that the object, by the way, they called it an unidentified helicopter. This was no helicopter. That the object remained inside the base for at least another 2 hours after that. At 3 a.m., this object was seen over the weapon storage area, totally unlit. No lights, but witnesses could see its dark shape standing on the ground. They could see it. Once again, Army National Guard helicopter responded, and they could not see the object, which was plainly visible to ground personnel. They could see the object and the helicopter. Can you imagine how frustrating that had to be to the witnesses on the ground? They were able to see it. The helicopter could not. And then finally, at some point, and we don't know the exact time, we're told that all contact was lost. That's a direct quote from the report. All contact was lost with this unknown object, although radar did briefly track it moving toward the Canadian border again. This is a 7-hour event over at Loring.
With an unidentified helicopter. Silent helicopter, by the way.
That's right.
So I just have to ask this. Was there any aircraft at the time that was something like that, you know,
I'm
what
very
they're
glad.
reporting here.
Yeah, excellent question. And short answer is no, and the long answer is no. But one thing that was
Okay.
being developed, if you want to talk about helicopter technology of that
Yeah.
era, the U.S. was just beginning its test flights of a truly badass helicopter, the Apache helicopter built by Hughes Aircraft. The Apache is, an absolute king of helicopters, and it was just getting test flights at that time. I think there were one or two actually in existence doing test flights out in California.
From the little I know about helicopters, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have been silent, though.
No, absolutely not. And I mentioned the Apache because it was the top of the line helicopter of its time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that even that could have been able to do the things that we're talking about here. And
Right.
Helicopters did, about a decade later, start becoming quieter. Someone inadvertently discovered the benefits of 5 blades as opposed to 4 blades. And one of the benefits was more quiet capability, but not in 1975.
Right.
So, and besides, there was no Apache helicopter out there in Maine at that time. Absolutely not.
And that explains the quiet. That doesn't explain the erratic maneuvers. And
right. And it's still, you still would have heard the helicopter, even more quiet helicopters at that, at a later time. So, and then there's a memo, and I'm wondering if I have yes, I'm going to share this with people watching here. So this is one of the defense memos, and I circled the key thing here. It says, it is our opinion that the unknown helicopter has demonstrated a clear intent in the weapons storage area, is smart and a most capable aviator. Local security has increased. We anticipate further incidents. Hell yes, they would, because as we now know, Loring had been having these incidents for quite some time. And this is just a kind of a boiled down quote here. Clear intent in the weapons storage area, and they, according to the memo, was flown by a smart and most capable aviator. Absolutely, it was. We found on YouTube a gentleman who had been stationed at Loring at around that time and talked about a UFO event, and his name
Michael
was
Wallace.
Michael Wallace. And we both watched it, but you actually really studied this in great detail. And one thing we couldn't figure out was the date of this event, but it seemed very close to what we're talking about.
Yeah, it had been, by the time he had done this video, I think it had been 40-something years. So he was trying to, nail down the exact date, but he knew it was around this time.
September or October, I think he said, 75.
In 75, yeah. And I found it super, his story is super interesting. He didn't see it, but he heard communications about what was going on from the command tower.
Right.
And so he overheard that there was, the UFO was back.
Right.
They had been, by the way, they have been pre-warned about this. I find that part super, super interesting.
They've been briefed by a major who brings this guy and his group in and says, all right, anyone who doesn't have a secret clearance
out,
leave the room. And then he warned them about UFO incursions.
Yeah.
That they had been having.
Yes. And I just want to say exactly what he said for this part. So these were the details given in the briefing before he heard or saw anything, heard anything himself in this briefing. So the details that they gave of these objects were hovering without sound, does have a few lights. It moves erratically. It can move quickly, can move unconventionally, rapid straight line movements, rapid vertical movements, can turn without any apparent radius in the turn. And it had been found hovering over B-52s on alert and the nuclear weapons storage facilities. So this was before. So, this is what they're getting debriefed with. And they were told not to speak to anyone about it. They could speak to them, but nobody else.
By the way, if you find this man's video, probably should have done a screenshot of it after all, but he's very credible man speaking about his experience. And there are not many videos out there on YouTube on the Loring 1975 encounter. It's shocking, honestly, that there's so little out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's describing how they were briefed prior to his encounter. So Loring
that
had
this
been dealing
had
with
been going on the base. Just so you know, this has been going on. We've been seeing UFOs, and they've been doing crazy things, and they're not like anything we've ever seen before. And we need to know about it, but nobody else does. So
that's right.
This is super interesting.
And his encounter was when he was one of 3 KC-135 tankers, I believe, doing a kind of a typical
refueling mission,
right, which is what they do.
Yeah. He was the second pilot. So there were 3 planes or 3 tankers, and he was the second one.
And on their way back, they were very much like over main airspace at this point.
Mm-hmm.
They learned that there was an event going on at Loring Air Force Base.
Yes, they're asking the first commander to change channels.
Right.
And he apparently listened in, as he figured the other pilot did too, to see what was going on. They were telling the first pilot that the UFO is back. It's back over the base, and we need you to break away, basically, put the second pilot into command here, and we want you to come in towards the base at your discretion, lights off, at any elevation you choose. And I guess he was given other specific orders.
Most likely to attempt to identify whatever this object was.
Right, to get some additional intel.
And there's nothing that a KC-135 tanker is going to be able to do to a UFO. They're big, huge aircraft. They're not nimble.
But they're in a they're in a good position to observe. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and then the other 2 planes, Mike Wallace was in, as I said, he was the captain of the second one, commander of the second one. They were to come in on their usual route. And
which was to land just north of the base, I believe. There was an airstrip there.
Yeah. So it was interesting. But what also occurred to me, if you go and look this up, check out the comments. The comments are really interesting.
Oh, right.
Because there are a lot of people, and you be the judge. But it sounds like there's a lot of people out there who were there, and they were in all different roles, like we were saying earlier, and they just have this information, and what are they going to do with it? So, I mean, for me, not as familiar with the lingo, they just rattle it off.
But all these old timers, they're basically saying, yes, I was at Loring. I remember that night. You got this detail wrong. You got this one right, and so forth.
Yeah. So it's kind of really interesting to check out. Yeah. And, when I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, so we have MUFON, but do we really have, or why don't we have, or I wish we had a military version of MUFON, maybe run by military people, and military could call in either anonymously or not, but have a database. I mean, I don't know if that would be successful or not. People probably wouldn't be able to do it for many different reasons. But a database, like when you read the comments, you think, gosh, all these people are just floating around that are all pieces of this puzzle. If you had a database that collected them all, even Hastings, Robert Hastings, I don't think he has exactly that. He is focused on this, but he's taking best cases. So if you had a different database that was sort of every piece of the puzzle and putting this giant, putting this mosaic together. This is what I was thinking when I was reading this, going, oh my gosh, all these people.
Well, he publishes the best cases. I wouldn't be surprised that he probably has pretty much everything that's out there.
Maybe he does, but and maybe it's available to everyone. I'm not sure. Maybe it is.
But your point's a good one. Like a kind of a MUFON that collects all of these military reports.
Yeah, they sort of specialize in it.
Well.
And then there's always
all that stuff's classified. They do, and most of it is not available.
The anonymous hotline,
That's basically it. But it was a very interesting case. He's very good to listen to. It's like a 10-15 minute thing. It's not that long.
Right. And every minute is interesting. Yeah. Every minute is interesting. So
by the way, I just is there anything else you wanted to share with that, or was that
no, that was it for that. But as far as Loring, I was also curious what MUFON had.
Oh, on Loring. And you did look into that.
I did. Right. And I only found one thing, and I'm not going to pretend that I have it down as far as how to extensively use the database, but with a quick search, excuse me, I was able to come up with something from 1975, but it wasn't reported until 2014. But it was consistent with everything else that was going on there. So this was actually a gentleman who saw this when he was a child.
Well, he was a teenager.
I think he was, let's see.
This is June 1975, I believe. So this is another loring event from a few months prior to the one we're talking about.
And this is someone who lived close to the base, not on the base. His parents lived there. So he was outside playing with someone. But the basic description is similar to a laser pointer. So there was the red light element. And if you heard Richard, that was prominent in all the cases. Similar to laser pointer, red dot over Loring Air Force Base being pursued by military aircraft.
It's good that MUFON does collect some of these, and their case management system, the CMS, is worth looking into for a lot of these older cases. And you find there's other loring cases from before and after 1975.
That's right. That's what I put in as a search word, loring. And so if you haven't done it before, I'm just getting used to using it a little bit more. You don't have to have a membership. You don't have to log in, and you can search this database in many different ways, by date, by place, by whatever. But
it's useful.
It is. There's some good information in there. So
I just want to mention a couple of other, one particular other researcher who actually did a lot of work on loring, and his name is Brian Vike. I've never met Brian Vike in person. I corresponded with him a number of years ago, and I have a lot of respect for his what he's done. He lives out in Houston, British Columbia. That's way, way out there. It's a tiny little town. I looked it up on a map, and I'm sure it's quite beautiful. I don't know how much else is out there, but Brian,
everything in BC is beautiful. Gotta say.
It is indeed. I will agree.
I'm biased, but anyone who's been there would agree, I'm sure.
But Brian Vike, his website, he's got, it's changed over the years, but now it's the V Factor Paranormal blog spot. And I've got it indicated right down here. And I strongly recommend, if you're interested in this type of research, go check out what he does. But one of the things he did regarding loring is he just gathered together a number of other witnesses. We're talking over 10, 15 years ago. He was a little more active, I think, in getting those witnesses. But many people, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 different loring personnel wrote to him over the years. Not all of them 1975. In fact, one was from the mid-60s, I think 1966. Several were from the late 70s. But some were about 1975. This one was from the wife of one of the Air Force personnel at Loring at the time. And she just said, look, I remember Halloween that year very well because the intrusions were just before Halloween. She said the base was locked down. We had to close all the blinds, no lights on. They were living on the base. The base was darkened. No one was allowed to enter or leave or exit the base. And in fact, that was corroborated by another witness who wrote to Vike relating the events at Loring. So quite interesting. And then this one was an NCO, I believe a sergeant, says, I can recall the discussions about the security police asking to shoot at it, and being told not to, despite the UFO about sitting on one of the weapon storage structures. I also recall the commanding officer coming to the weapon storage area while the UFO was there or just after. So very, very interesting. And in fact, Greenwood and Fawcett, when they were doing research into this, they also got the same information, which was basically no one's going to attack this thing because it's right over the nukes. No one really knew what was going to happen. So that's some of the research Brian Vike did. It's very excellent. And of course, there's Robert Hastings and his very, very excellent book on this subject, UFOs and Nukes. Strongly recommend this book for anyone seriously interested in this subject. Hastings is a very good writer, a very good researcher, and a very fine public speaker as well. He's out there on YouTube.
Doesn't he have a documentary as well?
That's right, yeah, on this exact subject. So it's all on his website, and he's very easy to search out. So I want to move on to the Wordsmith UFO Encounter. This is just slide to point out that there are lots of other intrusions at Loring. So here's Wordsmith Air Force Base. Loring's way over there. Wordsmith, it's in Michigan, again, near the Canadian border, as you can see. So Wordsmith this is another strategic air command base. This is another base where there's nuclear ordnance here. And once again, just like Loring, let me give a close-up of, there's Wordsmith here. Nice picture. It's an old-fashioned picture, and there's a layout of the base. And by the way, I want to stay on this image for a while because this is where the housing is over here, actually, I believe, and there's more facilities there. So, so once again, you have an object that resembles a helicopter, but then again, not exactly, showing a very strong interest in the weapons storage facilities at the base. Just after 10 o'clock at night, you have an airman in the housing areas at the southeastern part of the base down here. He sees what looks like running lights of a low-flying craft near the base perimeter south of him. He saw one light pointing down. He saw two red lights near the back of it. For at least some of this time, the object was hovering and moving up and down a little bit erratically as far as he could tell. He couldn't hear anything. Even though he was able to hear a much more distant B-52 to the north, he could hear that, but he couldn't hear this thing, which was much lower to the ground, much closer. A couple of minutes later, there's an on-duty airman near the main gate. He sees several lights close to where he is, near the western edge of the base. He can't hear a thing, and he's watching these lights go north and apparently get lower in altitude. Maybe this is the same object, maybe not. We don't really know. And then 3 times in the next 11 minutes, security police at the back gate seeing what they are describing as an unidentified helicopter with no lights entering the base itself. It's low over the ground, and they're seeing it near the weapons area. No one is able to identify this craft. This is some of the training aircraft that they had over at Wordsmith. Just like at Loring, no one is able to identify this. You have one sergeant saying he heard the sound of a possible helicopter. He only heard it briefly, and then it was gone. So doesn't seem like a helicopter to me. While all of these visual sightings were occurring, radar personnel at the base are reporting low-flying objects, plural, number of objects in the area. It just so happened that a KC-135 tanker is coming back into the area. Just like with the Mike Wallace case from Loring, we have it here at Wordsmith. They've got 6 personnel on board, and they are ordered to intercept and identify the object or objects. So they're vectored in by the base control tower. The plane, apparently they got a visual on this, and the object starts taking off. And I want to give you a map here. I'll come back to that document in a moment. This is a KC-135 tanker, by the way. You see how big they are. Right, it's doing a refueling of a jet here. They're very large. They're quite valuable, but I wouldn't describe them as nimble. But anyway, so here's Wordsmith. This is the Michigan, of course. And this is the direction they're going down to Saginaw Bay, about 40 miles southwest of where they are. So the object is going in that direction, and they're following it for about what seems to be a single craft for about 35 miles, and maybe going a little faster than 200 miles an hour. And then after a while, the crew's deciding we're not really seeing one object, we're seeing 2 objects. And we're watching these lights flashing irregularly, and it made it seem like they were in communication with each other, but no one could be sure. And they couldn't get a radar return for more than 10 seconds at a time. They're only a mile behind whatever this thing or these things were, but every time they increased their speed to close the distance, the object or the objects just easily pulled away. So they get down to Saginaw Bay, and that's where they lose them because there's all these fishing boat lights there, so they can't see the object anymore. So as they start back, now it's very obvious they're involved in some kind of cat and mouse game, because the object, maybe it was just one object, starts following them. So here's an account of what happened according to, as told to the official base historian. He's one of the members of the crew just says, on our way back, we pick up the UFO again at our 8 o'clock position. We turned away and it proceeded to follow us. Finally, we turned back in the direction of the UFO and it really took off back in the direction of the Bay Area. I know this might sound crazy, but I would estimate that the UFO sped away from us doing approximately 1,000 knots. That's more than 1,000 miles per hour. Then as the plane approached the base, once again, lights were seen near the weapons storage area. From the records that we have, it's not clear how this whole thing ended. But obviously the object left at some point, and then following the mission, the crew was told...
Wait, before you stop sharing,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at that quote.
Right.
I mean, okay, so something I learned, I did not know this. People who are, have been involved in the military, their
Right.
family-wise would know this or have studied it, but I didn't realize that there is a base historian at every base.
Right.
So this is being documented.
That's right.
In the base's history.
Not all UFO events appear in base histories, but sometimes they do.
No surprise.
Yeah.
But so here it is.
Exactly.
Written.
Absolutely.
Available.
100%.
To the public.
That is exactly right. And here's the kicker. This will be no surprise to you. At the end of the mission, the crew is told, don't talk about this.
Of course. Yeah.
Don't discuss this.
Don't talk about it, but it's still written up by the base historian?
That's
so
right.
That's
right.
Okay.
It was a matter of record for the base. And that's how we have that quote.
And this is publicly available. I know I keep saying that, but
Yes. This has been, in fact, this case came out, this quote and this information came out in a book called Clear Intent by Barry Greenwood and Lawrence Fawcett back in 1980, I think 1980, early 80s, 82 or 83 when that book came out. So, or 84. And yeah, they've got, they were the first ones to get the documents, but these are available through Freedom of Information Act research. And I'll bet anything John Greenwald over at the Black Vault has got them. And so they're there for you to read.
Sometimes on past shows, people have asked, where do we find these documents? If we want to show someone proof, if we, and I would consider this some pretty good proof, where do we go? And, John Greenwald is one place.
Right.
Black Vault. But here's another.
That's right.
So
we're putting it out as well.
FOIA documents. There are some official military documents.
Hastings has them. We publish them when we can, and they've been out for, most of these are publicly available. But what really the true value would be in collecting them and putting them together so that people can see them. Most documents coming out of the military, not fun reading, they're boring. And a lot of gems are hidden in those documents. One thing that
I could just see a coffee table book someone makes with just all the documents with the highlighted parts. Boom, just leave it there for when friends come over that harass you.
That would be fun.
It would be
That would be a nice thing to see, actually.
It'd be pretty cool if you did it artistically. I
would just like to ask you, and I'd like to ask people watching this, can helicopter explain this incident? I mean, once again, you've got a situation where an object is apparently hovering, it's maneuvering, it's low. So all of those things are what helicopters do, except it's way more quiet than any helicopter that I know about that existed in the 1970s or even later, and had an ability. I mean, this seems to be the exact same object that they were chasing down Lake Huron, and it then accelerates to past 1,000 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And there's no helicopter that can do that. I mean, you're talking jet fighter speed there.
Right.
Except this is not a jet. So whatever this thing was.
And I keep looking at this, can turn without any apparent radius in the turn.
Right.
I don't know. Can helicopters do that? I don't think so.
No. I mean, these are capabilities that are beyond the aerodynamic capabilities of what we had at the time. Non-radius turns are classic UFO. And they represent a science that's beyond the aviation science that we're talking here. Folks like Hal Puthoff and Jack Sarfati have made public statements of various types over the last year about the physics of how these UFOs might do what they do. All right. And they don't include the physics of aviation as we get it, in the 1970s.
Right.
So these objects are doing something beyond that,
right,
without a question.
Now, when I was talking to you about this earlier, I was saying, what craft were available around the world? Was there anything? Because some of the reports were able to sort of hover in one spot and then lift up and then shoot off. So, was there anything at the time? Anything? Well, anywhere in the world?
There's the famous Harrier jet that the UK has, and but I mean, the Harrier jet. So it's a jet that can lift up and then go off like this, but it's loud as hell. And obviously, this is not what we're talking about here,
right?
So, and I can't really think of any kind of vertical capability. There's a kind of a transformer type of craft called the Osprey that the Marines have. That is it's like a helicopter-ish type of thing that can also have a fixed wing part of it. This would
also be a good addition to the coffee table book for whoever is going to make that.
Yeah.
To have a glossary of craft that even approach doing any of these things, but don't.
Yeah, I definitely want to get Michael Schratt for an interview sometime soon. I think he's such a good researcher, and more than anyone that I know, at least within the UFO field, really knows aviation so well. So I think we're going to make a note to get him on here.
I'm doing that right now.
So let's move on to Malmstrom Air Force Base, because I want to talk about Malmstrom. I want to talk a little bit about Minot, and I want to talk a little bit about Falcon Bridge, Ontario, and it's. There's, we've been going for a while. So, but I don't want to, Malmstrom has to be discussed. So let me show a map here for people. And there we go. Boom, there's Malmstrom. So now we're moving west here, and we're still not far from Canada, a couple 100 miles from the Canadian border. Now, what's interesting about Malmstrom is that this is a location. Get a look at this. If you get your Google Earth, you can get various types of layers applied to it. And this is a layer that I downloaded showing nuclear sites. And you can just drag it right into your Google Earth. So this is Malmstrom Air Force Base. It's not just one little dot. By the way, these little push pins here are other nuclear sites. But if you get in closer, get a look at this here. This is a 200-mile span. These are all launch control sites at Malmstrom Air Force Base that they control. All right. So it's a mass. All of these are where you've got nuclear weapons. ICBMs are here. And the event we're about to talk about is at the very south end. It's at a place called K7, and it's right down there. Okay. Wow. So this is November 7th, 1975 at 3 in the afternoon. It's daylight. You have electronic sensors at the base detect a violation of the missile site at K7. All right. So something triggers this area right here. So this automatically triggers an alarm, and they don't have surveillance cameras in the area. So they send a sabotage alert team, SAT, a SAT, that is ordered to investigate. And as they're within 1 mile of K7 now. Okay. The members are reporting by radio that they see a bright, glowing orange disc as large as a football field over the missile site. Okay.
So no more helicopter excuse. Yeah.
Presumably, right, we could dispense with the helicopter explanation in this case. Now I want to share my screen, and these are just the fundamental notes, bullet points that I put together of this. You can look at that as I describe what's going on here. So as they're watching this, the launch control is ordering them to proceed to the site. And I didn't really know that you could do this, but they just say, no, we're not going to do that. This is the military, and they refuse this order. So they do not go any closer to this glowing. I mean, you can't really blame them. It's the size of a football field, and it's this orange glowing whatever over the missile. And then they're watching it rise. It starts to rise. So it had been very low. It gets to an altitude of about 1,000 feet, which is still pretty low. But at that point, it begins to register on NORAD radar. That's North American Air Defense. It's very important. And at that point, F-106 interceptors were scrambled from Malmstrom to engage with this thing, whatever it was. So obviously, it's not an ordinary object. It keeps rising and rising and rising. It gets to the incredible altitude of 200,000 feet. All right, that's more than double the ceiling of the U-2 spy plane, the ultra high flying U-2, which is famous. So it was incredible. At that point, it disappeared from NORAD radar. And that's when the F-106 jets arrive. And so they're way too late to see this. Interesting thing, the members of this sabotage alert team got a psychological examination, which indicated that they had been through a traumatic experience. No surprise. Mm-hmm. The missile at K7 showed indications that its computer targeting system had been tampered with, and they had to take it out. And it was also later revealed in the FOIA documents that 6 other launch control centers, other missile areas, had been reported UFOs that day. So that's what you have at Malmstrom at that moment. And then it happens the next night. So
just before you go there,
right.
Can you just make a comment on, you were saying that it was reported at flying at 200,000 feet?
That's right. It had ascended to 200,000
okay,
feet. So we're talking, how many miles is that? I don't know, 20, almost 20 miles.
But just to give people perspective of how high planes can fly and how because not everyone has that perspective.
No, right. So when you're in a commercial airliner flying across the continent, across the country, 35,000 feet is pretty typical. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's like 6 miles.
Right. And that's probably what
miles.
Most of us know. But what can the military do? Like,
well, they'll go much higher.
Okay. Like how
when they need
to that? How?
50,000. You'll have fighters that'll go up to maybe 40, 50,000 feet easily. They'll probably, I'm sure some of this information would be classified. But certainly 50, 60,000 feet military craft will do. The U-2, when it started flying in the 1950s, had a ceiling of at least 80,000 feet.
Okay.
So that's double, more than double a typical commercial airliner would do. The SR-71 Blackbird, which is introduced around the early 60s. I don't know the ceiling for that, but it has to be at least as high or higher. And they were ridiculously fast.
Okay. That gives good perspective,
Exactly.
I was curious, and I'm sure a lot of people were, is there anything that gets up around 100,000 and beyond?
Right. So there are. So this thing was 200,000 feet. All right. So, and where did it go after that? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't think that in the 70s, I don't even think today, but maybe today, but I don't think in the 70s we had anything, that anyone had anything that could be hovering as a red glowing whatever, and then within minutes, apparently, be up at an altitude of 200,000 feet. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you can justify that or in any technological way. So let me share the screen for the next day. And, again, you've got this crazy event. So this is November 8th, 1975. The following night. So November 7th was daytime. So a little more than 24 hours later, now it's the evening of the next day, NORAD radar detects unknown moving in the southwest direction, low, 1,200 feet, just about 1,000 feet. Once again, you have 2 F-106s that are scrambled. You have sabotage alert teams at 5 areas report objects at low altitudes. So this is clearly more than one object, it seems to me. And once again, you've got this kind of cat and mouse thing happening. You've got ground witnesses reporting that the UFOs turned off their lights and became invisible as the intercepting jets approached, and then turned their lights back on after the jets left. And at one point, you have teams in 4 different locations that are able to see the F-106 interceptors and the UFOs. And then finally, these objects, just like the day before, these objects rise rapidly until, and this is the words of one of the memos, they are indistinguishable from the stars. Here's a couple of memos from the Malmstrom event. observation of unidentified aircraft in the immediate vicinity of U.S. Air Force Missile Launch Control Facility. That's down here. And then the next page, objects could not be intercepted. All of this stuff, all of this information is interesting. Observe one object accelerate and climb rapidly to a point in altitude where it became indistinguishable from the stars on this page here. So that's Malmstrom. And, you know, it just kept going. Let me talk a little bit about Minot Air Force Base. I don't have as much information here, but we do have from the FOIA documentation, something happened at Minot on November 10th. There's Minot, North Dakota, again, right knocking at the door of Canada here. And what we have in one of the memos is this statement. I'll just read it. UFO sighting reported by Minot Air Force Base Station, a bright star-like object in the west moving east about the size of a car. First seen approximately, they give Zulu time, that's 4:15 in the morning local time. And then at around 5:20 local time, the object passed over the radar station, 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet high. So stop right there. So right over the radar station, low. All right. No noise heard. 3 people from the site or local area saw the object. And so that's Minot. And then I want to move right on because this is getting a little late here to Falcon Bridge. Now we're over the Canadian border. This is Ontario. By the way, this is very close to the Sudbury Station, where you've got, to my knowledge, the deepest underground scientific station in the world.
Yes, they measure neutrinos there, and you have to measure those from far under the ground.
Right. And Falcon Bridge is like right there. They have nuclear, or had, I don't know if they still do, they had nuclear weapons at that location as well. And this is a fascinating event and less well known, maybe because it's Canadian, I don't know, but it's really quite interesting. They gave a ridiculous explanation a few weeks after.
I'm snickering at the Canadian comments.
Well, I know it's actually quite significant.
Yeah.
This is an afternoon case, 4 in the afternoon, November 11th. You have civilians, you have police, you have military, you have NORAD radar. Everyone's either seeing or tracking a UFO that's hovering and maneuvering at fast speeds. So we have a NORAD document on this. You have ground observers thought that the object looked like a very bright star, but much closer than a bright star. Radar picked it up at 26,000 feet. So kind of a standard altitude that you would get with a lot of aircraft. 2 F-106 jets are sent from Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan. Let me show you where that is. So here's Falcon Bridge. Here's Selfridge, a couple hundred miles, 275 miles straight distance. And they're sent from there, but they got nothing. They couldn't see anything, and they got nothing on radar. But the thing is that, according to the NORAD report, that with binoculars, the object appeared as a 100-foot diameter sphere and appeared to have craters around the outside. So someone was getting a good look at this thing.
Craters.
It had some kind of texture on it, some denser ridges or something in there. So it's interesting that the Falcon Ridge case is it's the one instance in all of these from 1975 where NORAD personnel openly admitted that they tracked a UFO. There was a captain for Canadian NORAD headquarters. His name was Captain Gordon Hilchey. He was director of public affairs. And he said, yes, we saw this so-called UFO. At the same time, people outside were saying that they saw it too. In fact, I just want to point out his quote. I've got that. I might as well just show you since I put it together here. That's his statement. And he added that this object zoomed. Let me show you some bullet point cases of this. This is some interesting things about the case. It zoomed upward from 26,000 feet to 45,000 feet. That's a significant, I mean, a commercial airliner can increase at that altitude, but it's got to do it very gradually. This thing just zoomed up, and then it stopped a while, he said, and then moved up again very quickly to 72,000 feet. That's very high. There was another person of the 22nd NORAD Region Control Center. Name was Lieutenant Colonel Brian Wooding, and he agreed. He said, yes, that's right. And then another individual, spokesperson for NORAD headquarters in Colorado Springs, named Del Kinshi, added that this object was tracked intermittently on radar for 6 hours. Very interesting that back in those days, NORAD actually made any statements whatsoever. I don't think they would do anything of the sort today. The commanding officer of the Falcon Bridge base was a Major Robert Oliver, and he also said that he and 5 others at the base didn't see one, they saw 3 unidentified mysterious objects in the sky, and just added, I think both the United States and Canada collect UFO information, and I do believe they investigate the more serious ones. Someone said to him, apparently, that the U.S. government claims it no longer investigates UFOs. He says, I find that strange because in accordance with the normal procedures, I classified the UFO report going to Colorado Springs as secret. So that's interesting. So in 1975, you have a confirmation that they're sending secret UFO cases to NORAD. At that time, apparently, an American Air Force general named Daniel James, commanding general of NORAD, asked him to declassify the report. And in Oliver's opinion, he says apparently General James wanted to provide information to people who were interested in it. So that's interesting. And I would love to know the behind the scenes machinations. But what's interesting is that 3 years after this, in the late 70s, the Canadian National Research Council, they were out in Ottawa and they were supposedly investigating. They were like the closest that Canada ever got to their own Project Blue Book, except these guys didn't research anything whatsoever, as far as I can tell. But they announced that that UFO had simply been layers of crystallized ice in the atmosphere.
They come up with some pretty interesting stuff.
It was absolutely absurd. So, yeah, that's it. Those are all the slides that I want to share. And I just think like these cases are fascinating. And honestly, there are more than these. There are more than these.
Yeah. So this is just a tiny sampling of.
It's a good core of what was happening at the end of October, going into November of 1975. And all along, I mean, other than Cheyenne Mountain, which is a little south of it, but very important as nuclear. I mean, this is NORAD headquarters there. But all these other incursions that we know about are very much along the northern U.S. border with Canada or in Canada. And what that means is a good thing to mull over. I don't know anyone who's really figured out what was happening. But these are not helicopters.
They're not helicopters. They're clearly not attacking.
No.
Yeah, they clearly have.
Although they did screw with the electronics of at least one of the missiles at K7 at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So they're doing something that the U.S. military would say, not
interesting,
not cool.
That we are not doing anything to them. They don't appear to be doing anything to us. Yet there's
right.
They're there for 7 hours in some situations.
Over Loring, yeah. Very, very significant snooping around, investigation. I mean, there's all different types of speculations, whether it's a narcotics trafficking operation. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So with Loring, there was this speculation that it was a narco operation, but I don't.
How so? I mean.
Exactly. Why would, if you're smuggling drugs in, well, maybe the U.S. military was the center of the narco operation. That wouldn't actually be the most shocking thing, particularly in the 70s. But no. I mean, when you look at the behaviors of this object, clearly that's not what you're talking about. If there were any kind of narcotics operation, the one thing they don't want is to be visible to the U.S. military and to be snooping around. I mean, my God. So the fact that anyone was offering this as a suggestion strikes me as just ludicrous. It's ridiculous. And someone actually wondered, well, did the Russians launch a helicopter from offshore, from some carrier or from some craft? I've never seen a serious investigation that could be so, but I actually, you can find people wondering, was it a Russian craft of some sort?
But I think, didn't they find out through declassified documents that Russia was having the same thing going on as well?
Yes, absolutely. Now, I don't know about exactly 1975. I'm sure they were having them in 70s too. But the Soviet Union, which was very much a closed book to the rest of the world at the time, absolutely was having, and we've talked about this, of course, having their own UFO encounters that they could not explain over their
and apparent
nuclear
tampering
sites.
with weapons. Yeah.
At Kapustin Yar, which was their combination of White Sands, Area 51, they had the same thing going on there as well.
Right.
So, yes.
You think that would bring us all together, but
just like Ronald Reagan used to say a few times, why can't, well, that was Rodney King. Why can't we all just get along? But Ronald Reagan was saying it with aliens, if we were facing an alien threat, I can't help but think we would all work together. And you'd think that, but then again, hasn't happened, has it? I mean, we're at a point now where we're at the Cold War is at its worst point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, the United States media and Western public political groups have gone out of their minds with Cold War fever. So obviously the UFO threat hasn't, if you can call it that, hasn't really brought them together at all. So 1975, kind of an unremarked upon. Like, it just shocks me when you do searches on this, particularly YouTube, which is where all the action is. Try finding a lot of information on these 1975 incursions, and it's very tough. We found one by a guy who talked a little bit about the Wordsmith case for about 15 minutes, I guess. You've got the Loring statement from this gentleman, Mike Wallace, and there's not a lot.
Yeah, it is pretty
Not
amazing.
It's slim pickings. So I think that these cases are very significant, especially now. We're in an era where the UFO subject has been kind of rebooted, basically as UAP with To the Stars Academy. People like Luis Elizondo has been very, very public, and they don't say UFO. They talk about UAP. And I get that. We can understand why they do this. UFOs got all this baggage to it, but part of the baggage that UFOs bring, we don't want to lose this, because part of that baggage is military encounters, like hair standing up in the back of your neck type of encounters. And by rebranding this as UAP, you really see that there's this attempt to defang UFOs and make them a little more mysterious, like we don't know what they are. And, I'm just going to say, you do know what they are. And people in the classified world absolutely have known what they are for a long, long time now. You can understand publicly why they do this.
Of course.
They're trying to position this subject in a way that it gets a public hearing. And so they're trying to do that. And I understand that. But the fact is, what you're seeing now is the entire mainstream narrative is playing along with this. And so when you research this on YouTube, especially, it's like, why not just turn on your TV? If you're going to do a YouTube search, it's like MSNBC, Fox, ABC, CNN, BBC. Just turn on your damn TV. Like, why even bother doing YouTube searches? Because all you get are mainstream television. So you can see this whole thing has been hijacked by the mainstream. And it's again, it's understandable on the one hand, but it's very disturbing to see this.
Well, I don't think
domination.
this history will ever go away. It's all well preserved by you and other researchers. But you're right. It is sort of like they're trying to do a reset.
Oh yeah,
and bring everybody along. Like they're just discovering the mystery with us
for the first time.
Yeah.
Golly. So that means no acquired technology or bodies, because I mean, let's face it. You start talking about UAP as these mysterious things. We don't know what they are. Maybe they're Russian. Maybe they're Chinese. BS. They're not Russian. They're not Chinese. If you start getting into the fact that they're acquired technology and bodies, well, there goes that whole facade. Now you've got to get into the nitty gritty of we've acquired technology, metamaterials, and we're trying to figure out the science and all of that. So that gets into, guess what, folks, the cover up. And that's what we're talking about here. Of course, it's a cover up. And, look, I've said this with After Disclosure 10 years ago, almost, which is that when this you can try to modulate your disclosure. I'm calling it controlled disclosure these days. You can try to do that, and good luck with that. It's not going to get you very far, because at some point it's going to come home to people that you've got technology and you've got more, and that gets you into cover up, and that takes disclosure into a whole new messy area that becomes very difficult to control. No matter how much YouTube tries to skew the results with their dishonest algorithms, it's going to happen that the truth will come out. We'll see if they demonetize this.
People probably watching my eyes every time you say that. Okay.
They have these automatic algorithms where they'll do this all the time, and then you have to manually argue with them, and you have to talk to a human being, and usually they'll be like, okay, sorry, but their algorithms it's like the ultimate school marm nanny that everyone hates, the finger wagging moralistic person who's the killjoy of every party. That's the YouTube censoring algorithms, and they'll just demonetize at the drop of a hat.
Well, hopefully not this, but
we'll see.
I don't know. Maybe we won't say things like that in the future, since we're broadcasting on YouTube.
Good luck trying to get me not to.
I know, but it's it's good that people are aware. But I'm pretty sure everybody who is here is a pretty savvy consumer of this information, and you already know that. I want to do some research, proper research on the dishonesty of the YouTube algorithms for the future. Maybe for intelligent disclosure, or maybe for a Saturday thing, but I really want to. I think people need to understand you're not getting honest results when you search. I thought you were joking at first, but you're not.
No, I'm totally serious.
Well, no, it is important for people to understand that.
They need to see just how bad it is.
Because, we all know people who think that it is an honest, unbiased search.
But it's not. It's totally dishonest. It's rigged. The whole system of the YouTube search is a rigged game now. Once upon a time, it wasn't this way, but it is this way now.
Right. First, it was Google. Now,
which now owns YouTube, now, of course.
Yes, exactly. So why don't we look at a couple of questions here?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
All right.
This is fun. Did you have fun with this?
Yes.
This is kind of glad we did this.
This is your.
I get into it.
Yes,
Well, it's fascinating, and I think
for sure.
I for this particular one, I just feel like this was an underreported, underappreciated series of events.
Yeah, I know you felt very passionate about people understanding this series. Like 1975 was important, and you explained that in the beginning of the video. If people didn't see that, because there were all sorts of different types of things really emerging in that time frame.
That's right.
But this series is so important. There's documentation attached to it, and there's so many different people reporting this, and these are clearly objects that are nothing that we have. So
without an explanation to this day, they were not helicopters.
It is amazing that that this is not more well known. Right. Amazing.
Oh, I'm seeing a question dealing with the TR-3B and the Navy in general, and I just want to I don't want to get into that right now, but I want to say that either tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, I'm going to do a separate presentation here on YouTube, probably a pre-record, that is dealing with the recent news of the United States Navy and their UAP reporting procedures. This was reported a week ago by Politico. They got the scoop, and it was re-reported elsewhere. So I'm going to be discussing that. I don't want to dilute this program with the talk about the Navy. That's current news, but do look on this channel for something either tomorrow or the day after, and I'll release some. I've got some thoughts about that.
Okay, now we have this other question here from Retro Pirate Truth Seeker.
A thumbs up to Retro Pirate.
Yes.
Truth Seeker, by the way.
Thank you for supporting us. Could the UFOs be self-projections of our own thoughts, consciousness, or some other high strangeness, and not the nuts and bolts we are led to believe?
Thanks for asking that question. And many people have asked this type of question. Many people have opinions on this, and there are folks out there who do believe that, at least to some extent, that's true. And I guess to some extent, I wouldn't rule all of that out 100%, but I would say in the cases that we talked about tonight, I would not think that these are projections of our thoughts. I don't really understand how that would be the case when something's being tracked on NORAD radar, for example, at the same time that witnesses are seeing it. I mean, at a certain point, I would say that if we are unable to trust our own senses, our eyes and our ears and so forth, then we're in a really bad situation as living biological creatures that have been on this world for a long, 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 long time, where we rely on those senses, and they're honed for a very good reason. They work really well. Now, having said that, is it possible that our mind is so able to create reality that we're seeing these objects? One of the things that I learned, I'm sure you know this, is that of all of the millions of inputs that we get all the time, there's actually all of this information coming at us. We can't process it.
Right.
We don't have the we couldn't do it. So we have to filter. And by filtering, you could argue that's how we create our reality, right?
Right.
So I would never rule out that our perceptions are paramount in this. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but I have not come to a conclusion that most of this UFO phenomenon is a result of that. But I can't rule out that there are elements of our mind that can be invaded by these entities.
Right.
I think they have the ability. But then there is one last thing I'll just say here, and then I want you to take this. Throughout our history, throughout all the long human history, when we look at UFO, or what we would call UFOs, or encounters with other beings, it is true that many of them seem to follow very definite cultural and psychological expectations of the time. Now, what is that all about? Does that mean that our mind is creating this, or might it mean that they are conforming to those for certain reasons?
Right.
I mean, it's hard to know.
Yeah. Well, I personally think there's some form of manipulation going on. And, the deeper we go, I think it is possible. I don't think in these cases it's as possible because there's so many witnesses.
These are projections, you mean? Or?
Yeah, I don't think these are necessarily projections, but you got to wonder when you hear so many cases that are where someone will be standing in a group and one person or two people will see a craft or have an experience and the rest won't. What's going on in that situation.
Right.
So
right. That's a good observation. Like, you got cases where some witnesses will see something and people standing right next to them will not.
Right. So it does seem, and we were talking about this last night because I was talking about something that happened to me, and I was saying, the only thing I feel like I know for sure is that these beings have a greater cognitive ability. They seem to, and that they seem to be able to manipulate. And that was based on something that happened to me, and also the research of David Jacobs and Carla Turner. So I don't know. I feel like there's so many variables going on here. It's really difficult to pull them apart. We know the mind is super powerful, and we assume they are way ahead of us. So I just think we are far easier to manipulate than we even realize.
Now, his question was a little bit more like, is it our own consciousness? And
could we be creating it?
Yeah. I personally don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Maybe
suppose you could argue that some people are creating wish fulfillment if they're super into this in their dreams or something like that. I think you could probably make an argument that way, but conscious daytime artificial sightings as projections, no, I don't think so.
I would want to see more evidence, science backing up the likelihood that such a thing could actually happen, like a true mass hysteria could occur in this way. But anyway, thanks for the question. What else we have here?
Okay. So
Can we scroll?
Excuse me, you got this one.
We'll probably want to wrap this up soon because we did go a little long. Data lore question. UFOs shut down nukes, yet they don't mind the 2,000 nukes we tested. So why would they shut down certain ones and yet let us explode over 2,000?
Good question.
Absolutely.
Great
I've asked this
question.
many, many times myself. From 1945 until the end of the 20th century, I can't even remember the number now, but something like 2,000 nuclear detonations took place. I think that's what it was. You can go on YouTube, and there's a very good video that shows these nuclear detonations kind of in like the space of 10 or 15 minutes, and you can just see them, boom, boom, boom. It's shocking. So not only did they not stop us from, operating nukes, they didn't stop us from detonating massive yield nuclear explosions throughout, especially in the late 50s. Situation was totally out of control. The Americans and the Soviets were blowing bigger and bigger hydrogen bombs. So I'm with the questioner here. Like, I'm not of the opinion necessarily that these other beings are all that concerned about our nuclear technology. Like, really? Maybe they care, but they're not able. Maybe they've got limited capabilities. Maybe they know that some nukes are going to be used, but
yeah, right.
honestly,
so they have any sort of ability to see into the future of destruction, and they intervene with.
Now we're getting into some real sci-fi kinds of.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's hard. How could we know the answer? But
I'm with this person. I think that they did something. Why would they screw with these nukes? Because they did it at Malmstrom in 1967. Everyone knows about that. And there are many other cases as well where it's been argued that they screwed with nukes. So did they do it just haphazardly? Maybe it's just a haphazard thing. Maybe they don't have the capability to stop it totally. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. I would love to get inside their head one day and understand why these things happen. There's just so much we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fair to try to understand their motivations, but ultimately it may be a losing game to try to do that. And all we have is the data, and the data doesn't give us every single answer that we want, unfortunately.
I
wish it did.
We end up having to speculate so much.
I'm going to recommend we close this up soon because we have gone 93 minutes. So what do you think about that?
Okay. We can do that. No, I didn't realize it had been that long either.
Someone asked, what are my thoughts on the Bell Island boom? Wow. Not many talk about it, but this person is fascinated. This is reviving real news. I'll just real quickly. Do you know William Shatner hosted a show in Canada?
Yeah.
Because he's Canadian, called, what was it called?
His show?
Yeah, show was called Real or What? No. Something or What? What the heck was that called?
I'm sure someone in chat knows. I don't have the
someone else. Anyway,
see if I see.
I was asked to drive up to Toronto to talk about the Bell Island case for that show. Weird or What? Thank you, Lance.
Yeah, we're just pulling it up here.
Weird or What? I couldn't remember. So I drove into Toronto. They shoot me for a day. I didn't get to meet Shatner. That would have been cool. I would have done my best Shatner for Shatner, which probably everyone who meets him does.
He must hate that. Yeah, I'm sure everyone does.
I bet he loves it.
No way.
If you're Shatner, the guy's a total ham. I'm sure everyone would love to do that for William Shatner, and Shatner would love to hear it.
Oh yeah, over and over and over and over and over. No way. Yeah.
So I'm sure your Shatner's better than my Shatner. Anyway, so I did a thing for Weird or What. Sat there and talked about the Bell Island boom. And Bell Island is it's in Nova Scotia. Where the heck is that? It's off the coast of Nova Scotia, I believe.
I don't know.
It's like a deserted a former mining town now. Once upon a time, it was kind of, really rocking and rolling. They were getting
I'm very
mining
curious
out of
now
there.
where it is in Atlantic
and then
Canada.
The mining boom ended. But anyway, on this island in 1978, there was this massive explosion that knocked people over and broke windows. And I mean, it was this very unexplained thing. And I think people tried to blame it on what was then the supersonic transport, the SST, That was certainly not what caused it. There was, I think the best explanation that I remembered learning about this was that this could have been a U.S. military test that did not, it was like a whoops type of a moment with the folks at Bell Island. There was some talk about a Vela satellite, and forgive me for not knowing the details on that case off the top of my head, but heck of a case. I don't think it was a UFO event, but very interesting.
Newfoundland.
Weird. Newfoundland, thank you.
I was curious.
Okay. Well, I think with that, we should probably wrap this up. What do you think?
Okay. Yes. So
you want to keep going?
No. This is the first time I'm seeing chat, and it's like, hey, everyone, just want to say hi.
So one person asked, does this broadcast count as 50% Canadian content? Is that a Canadian
I love
joke?
it. Yes, Canadian content are radio stations. There's a certain percentage of Canadian content that has to be played. It's an advertising law. So
that's why you hear the tragically hip
what the
everywhere you go in Canada.
Right.
It's all about the hip.
That's right. Hey, we've got more than the hip, okay? Got way more than that.
I like the hip. I saw them live.
Yeah, the hip. Yes, they are.
In Kingston.
Awesome.
It was like about 5 years ago. They were awesome. Love them. If you're not Canadian, you may not know about the Tragically Hip, but they were a great rock band, mainly of the 90s. And
see, he's an honorary Canadian. He gets this status because he walks around and tells all these amazing stories about
Gordon Downey is no longer with us. Their lead singer
that was
recently
really
died.
sad.
Very, very sad. He was a very cool guy.
So
love the hip. Love the hip.
I guess you could call this 50% Canadian content. I like
there
that.
We go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do think I'm in favor of keeping it a little tight here. We've gone long enough.
Yes,
so
and you're going to do an extra broadcast this week, so keep an eye out for that. That will be in the next couple of days. So let's say thank you. Thank you to Pursuing X, and thank you to all of you. We see you all here in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. And I think there were some super chats. Thank you for that. All the different ways you support us. Subscribing to the YouTube channel is a free way to support us, and it means so much. And it's a great way to support Richard's research. And so we just want to thank everyone in the different ways that you do support.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Okay. And with that, I think it's time for us to say goodnight.
Good night, everybody.
And what's my tagline for tonight? Don't let the bastards get you down. Always a good one. And let's keep fighting the good fight. Catch you later.
Love it.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.